buddy Joseph here with Jay's Journey. Thanks for tuning in on this beautiful Sunday morning. That's just a guitar hack I'm going over. I'll start off today with just a little guitar hack for everybody. And this one's just based on a G chord. And I don't know if you can see, I'm playing a G. I hope you can see. I'm playing a G. Hey, that rhymes. The light's not so good this morning. I got these. Okay, so I'm playing like just your basic G chord. Right? And I'm putting a D here. Like that. And then pinky up on the G, so you got these two. Like that. And then your middle finger in there. So I'm playing like it's almost like a G modal chord. I mean, there is a third in there, but give it the major sound. But then we're moving up to the 6th fret, and that becomes now some sort of a B flat with extensions on it, and a C. I'm just using the same shape, so I'm going to the 6th fret, to the 8th fret, and then back to the 3rd fret with that G shape. And then I go down to the 1st fret with that, slide it up, so it becomes an F to G. So the chords are actually like G, B flat, C, G, F, G. For the old rockers. Just a ditty. But the hack that I'm trying to get, what you can experiment with, which is a lot of fun, is just take any chord shape of your basic, like the A sus2, which helps a little out of tune. Get that G string in line. A little better, still out of tune, but it's okay. That A sus2, which is just your two little fingers, if you can see here. One there on the 2nd fret on your D string, and one on your G string on the 2nd fret, and strum the whole chord open. You don't have to get that E in there if you don't want to. Just the top 5. Then you can move it. So it means you can move these chords a lot of different ways. The same thing with the D sus2. The same. I'm going to 5th fret, 7th fret, and then back to your 2nd fret position. The D sus2 is just the A string, and then, the G, 2nd fret on the G string, 3rd fret on the B string, and strum it open. It's an A sus2. They're kind of modal chords because they could be D minor, kind of thing, or D major. It kind of leaves a mystery in there as to whether it's major or minor, but definitely minor there. Anyway, these are just little hacks you can play. It's very interesting. But what I really wanted to talk to everybody about today is if you had seen the documentary Get Back, the Beatles documentary. It's streaming on the Disney Channel. I think that's the only way you can get it, is by streaming on the Disney Channel. I think it's like, I think you can get it for like $8 or something. Download it on your TV, on your apps, or whatever. And that's the only way it's available. That's the only bummer of the thing is a lot of people are probably not going to see it until it comes out some other venue. But I took copious notes It's a 6-hour series. It's in 3 parts, 3 2-hour parts. But it's just chopped up video that was in the archives. A lot of the chopped up video, there were scenes that were reminiscent of the movie Let It Be, which was kind of a breakup movie. They kind of portrayed a lot of negative moments in that one, but this one was very, very positive, and for me, it demystified the Beatles. As a kid, listening to them and trying to learn their music, and they had some pretty complicated chord structures in a lot of their songs that broke a lot of the rules of, especially when you were used to playing boogies like 1-4-5 blues boogies, things like that. Whatever. Those kind of things as a kid. And then came along these songs with all these complicated chord patterns and some augmented chords or diminished chords, things like that. And of course, one of the things that I'm going to talk about in here too is we used to get the fake books, and they were published music of Beatles songs. And they would write the guitar chords on top and everything. And I don't know whether it was because the turntables weren't perfect or the pitch on them or what, but they would write them in the most ungodly keys too, some of these fake books. They'd have these guitar chords that were just impossible sometimes for a beginning guitar player to figure out and play. Like I said, weird chords in some of the songs. What I was going to say was, that made it difficult for us to learn their songs. You had to sit down with a record, and of course, like I say, you had to tune your guitar to the turntable. This is old technology, because they recorded everything in concert pitch. I mean, the piano, they tuned to a piano. It was probably close to 440, if not 440. But some of the instruments, might have been a microtone off. Matter of fact, there's a scene in there where they got all excited. They brought in a brand new Fender Rhodes. They got a deal with Fender. It's halfway through the movie. They had originally had a deal going with Gibson. I guess it ended, so they switched over to Fender. There was a lot of cool new Fender instruments that showed up. One was a 6-string Fender bass, and they play that in some of the clips on the movie. But the interesting thing was that the Fender Rhodes arrived, and there's one little snippet in there, you catch it real quick, where I think it's John or one of them is saying, I think it's out of tune a little bit. How do you tune it? And one of the guys says, oh, you can't tune it. Anyway, and Billy Preston shows up at that point in time. And wow, did he changed the whole demeanor of everything. But my point is this documentary really demystifies to me a lot of the Beatles, and I got to see their humanity, their warmth as human beings. These were very young men at the time, 28 years old, and had been through an awful lot and very mature beyond their years, I felt. And boy, did they have a work ethic. They showed up and started just digging in. And there was a lot of people in the background had great careers. Obviously, George Martin was there at some point in the middle of when they were trying to get it back on track. They brought in Sir George Martin, to kind of help him out. But Alan Parsons was just a tape guy. He was just putting tape on the machines. What's his name? Liam Johns or whatever was running a lot of the engineering part of it. And it was great. It was just a great thing. But I took notes, and I wanted to go through some of them. The first thing I noted was, I said they were 28 years old. They were young, but they could all play each other's instruments too, which I didn't really know that about them. I always felt that Paul was always on the bass, John was always on rhythm guitar, and Ringo on the drums, and George on lead guitar. Well, they really could function independently of those roles. I mean, Paul was a pretty good piano player. banging out chords, but they could all bang out chords on the piano, every one of them. Wrote songs on piano, all of them, and even Ringo. And then John also played lead guitar, not just rhythm guitar. And sometimes he would do some in the song. I think it was Get one of the songs. He was actually playing, the lead. And Paul could also play guitar. Obviously, he wrote Yesterday on guitar. He wrote Blackbird on guitar. I mean, excellent. All of them were very excellent musicians in their own right, and they paid their dues they had been playing together for, solidly for over 10 years at that point, and they would play those shows in Germany, and they would do these 20-minute, 30-minute sets over and over again all day in those cabaret clubs in Germany, and it really developed their chops and their ears and learned how to learn music and etc. That talent was really showcased in that documentary. They would all come in with ideas for songs a lot of times, but it was mostly Paul and John that were kind of running the songwriting thing. And throughout the thing, you could see kind of George was the youngest, by the way. He was only a year younger or so than the rest of them, but he was the youngest, and it was kind of a family dynamic that you get to see their personalities and how they fit into the social structure of the group. And I think George was increasingly frustrated as time went on that he didn't get a lot of his songs recorded on the albums. He was kind of discounted sometimes by Paul and John. Paul and John were the senior fellows. Ringo was very chill. He was always relaxed and kind of went with the flow, a lot more easy. I think George was a little more uptight about things. Paul was driven. He was driven. He wanted to write and work all the time. Between him and John were the first two very close guys, together. And that whole dynamic was very interesting to watch and really learn about. That's why, it says it demystifies them, because you get to see like their inner circle of how they work too. They all come in with ideas. I took notes, so I'm going to refer to my notes a little bit here. So I put down the role. Paul was kind of stoic. He was the arranger, the chief. He had hyper focus. He was very secure and structural, but he did mix up things with levity. It wasn't like he didn't have a sense of humor. And John was more artistic. He was more of a riffer. He was more improv. He did a lot of things. He was a little bit insecure, I think John was, about things. And he was kind of sensitive, a lot more feelings, more sensitive. George was very sensible. He was also a little bit insecure and defensive and sensitive about things from time to time. He was a very structured guitarist. There's one scene in there where he was kind of struggling with his own ability. The main instruments they were on, they were somewhat, virtuosic. They could play them really well, but George had to be structured. His solos were very structured. The thing that he didn't realize, he had a great sense of melody, how to structure and build a solo that actually was melody, not just riffing in the same blues riff over and over again, not just doing like like a pentatonic or blues. He didn't improvise like that. He sat down and thought about his solo and, played it, in a very structured way. And he was frustrated because he was watching guys like Eric Clapton, Jeff Beck, and all these other contemporaries who would solo for 20 minutes, doing all kinds of blues riffs. And that wasn't his style. That wasn't how he played. And he mentioned that in there. He wanted to learn how to do that more. And then the other thing that I noticed was the support crew. The support crew was awesome. There was the road manager. I don't know what his name was. I forgot. They say it in the movie. I didn't write down his name, but he's a big guy. And not only did he move equipment and set up equipment and that kind of thing for everybody. But he would write down the lyrics when they were writing a song and singing. He would sit there and write down what they were singing because they wouldn't remember right away afterwards what they were singing. And he would just jot down the phrases, and then they would structure the phrases afterwards and figure out what they were. And the whole movie, Get Back, the song Get Back, started out as a immigrant protest song about treating immigrants really poorly. Yeah, I guess it would you would call it an anti-immigrant protest song is what I would say. Is, you know, they weren't anti-immigrant, but they were protesting anti-immigration at the time. And that's what Get Back was. Get back to your own country. Go back to where you belong. That was what they were talking about. And I didn't know that until, you know, you don't pay attention to a lot of things until you see it, until they tell you. Let's see, that same guy, that support guy that was writing down the lyrics and doing the road, moving the equipment like a roadie, he played the amble in Maxwell's Silver Hammer. And he was so excited that he got to even just play the amble with him. Linda Eastman was Paul's girlfriend at the time, and she was going around there. Of course, Eastman Kodak. She had a wonderful camera, and she was a great photographer. And she took a lot of wonderful pictures of the Beatles during that time. And they all had their Yoko was in there all the time with John, and she would sit right next to John through the whole rehearsal and just sit there. Kind of in a very supportive role, and you could tell he was kind of like he was like her emotional support person there for John all the time. He was so much in love with her, and she was in the studio with him. And there's actually a point in there where they're just making noise, and she's just screaming into a microphone, and it was just like those records that she did when she did that kind of artistic kind of thing. Like I say, John was more artistic than the other ones. And then the other thing was there's a scene in there where George gets shocked by the microphone. You know, when you touch your strings on a guitar and you touch the microphone, in the old days, the electronics weren't as well grounded as they are today. And if you were they were on a concrete platform in a warehouse or whatever, well, it was conducting electricity, and you'd touch it and it'd be like it'd start to feed back, and then it would shock him. And he was telling one of the managers, I don't remember who it was, or one of the guys that was running the movie at the time, and they said no, and he said, yeah, go ahead, touch this and touch that, and he did, and the guy goes, oh, and he goes, yeah, see? And I remember as a kid playing, where we'd go up to sing, we'd be playing the guitar and we'd get up to the microphone to sing, and your lips would arc on that microphone. It was horrible. And we used to have to test it in a band I was in years ago. The bass player would actually, he didn't mind it. It didn't bother him. And I used to have an ohm meter. I would touch the strings here and touch the microphone to see how much electricity was flowing through there. But he would do it, test it. He would just hold his bass like this and go around to the microphones and touch them like this. And he'd go, oh, that one's not bad. And for him, when he'd say it was not bad, for me, that would shock me, and I didn't like it. But that really brought back a lot of memories too. Purchased EMI affiliation at one time. Oh, the business manager, Dick, that was his name. They called him Dick. I don't know what his real name was. But he came in, and one of their, they had purchased EMI, and they had a whole bunch of songs, that publishing rights that they had purchased. And there's a scene where they're sitting around, they're going through the songs. The purchasing of the songs, they were going through the catalog, and they were looking at names of songs. He goes, oh, my dad used to love that song. They had old songs, and one of them asked, well, what's the purpose of buying all the rights to these songs? And he said, it's because we publish the sheet music, and we sell these songs and books in the sheet music, and we get portions of those royalties come in. So it's an investment. It's like buying real estate that grows. So they were like, oh, that was their first lesson in probably how it works with the copyrights ending, and now the whole Beatles catalog was owned by Michael Jackson at one time. So I don't know. And they were not afraid of sounding bad when they were banging out songs and rehearsing. It was just like what I do, what our band does. You go through it and you play and you hit stinking notes because you don't know the song yet, you're learning it. And they did the same thing. I mean, there was times where their guitars were so out of tune that even the guy, the engineer, I don't know if it was George Martin or who, came out and said, "Hey, you guys want to tune up or something?" And they were like, "Nah, why?" They make jokes about it, you know. "Oh, you mean you want us to play in tune?" You know, kind of thing. And because they were banging out songs trying to learn them. And when it got out of tune, they were more interested in getting the idea out than caring about whether it was sounding exactly right at the time. And that was a big insight for me, because that's the same process that most songwriters, most bands go through. You gotta not be afraid to stink. And I've said that a million times in my videos. John Lennon was kind of a clown. He would clown around. He had a good sense of humor. He was a jokester. He had a bizarre sense of humor. A little bit sarcastic and snarky, I guess. That came through a little bit. So the whole premise of this movie, I don't know if I said that in the beginning, was they were going to make a big TV production of some sort. And they were going into the studio and they wanted to write a whole album and then have an audience come in, and they were going to film this whole album as like a TV special, like a concert just for celebrities or whoever they invite. And then they thought about, oh, let's move it to like some exotic location. I can't remember where they were going to take it to, like somewhere in Saudi Arabia or somewhere. And they were going to put everybody on a boat and sail them down there and do the whole concert down there. That idea got scrubbed at one point because it was just too expensive and not worthy of it. And then they decided they were went back into the studio. They left this big exotic warehouse where they were going to have a set, and they went back to their studio at Apple Records, and that was when they decided to do that big concert on the roof. And it got shut down by the police because there was a huge crowd that gathered all around down the streets down there, and it blocked traffic. It caused traffic jams and everything. It was really interesting. But that was the same with the movie Let It Be. It's the same ending, or it's the concert on the roof kind of thing. And it sounded really good. I mean, they did a great job. And Billy Preston joined them. When they went into the studio, that's when they got some of the Fender equipment in, and Billy Preston moved in there and started playing the Fender Rhodes piano with them, and played the organ on Let It Be and things like that. He brought kind of new life. They all kind of, what do you want to say, is it changed the whole demeanor. Like, they got a lot more lighter and happier when Billy came in and he was playing. It excited them. That's what I want to say. It brought new excitement to the music that they were doing. Because Billy Preston was awesome, you know, and he had that soul and the soulful type of playing, you know, in the keyboards, and added that to their sound, which was great. You know, there's a point in there where George got kind of upset. George wanted to record some of his songs, and I think he felt like Paul was pushing him to come up with certain parts and wanted him to play certain things, and he felt like he was trying real hard but not achieving what he was looking for. Like I said, Paul was really driven sometimes to try to get a result, and he was really focused, hyper-focused on things, and could be intense, I think. And so at one point George quits the band for about 3 days. John and Paul had a meeting about it and talked about how they needed to change the way they treat George. They had 2 meetings, I think, with George that weren't on film. I think they went to his house or something. Finally convinced him to come back, and it's a good thing because they were trying to get, at the time they had the 8-track recording was available, but they only had 4-track at the studio that they were working with. And one of the problems they were having with it was that the equipment, they had constant hum in there. They couldn't seem to get the recording equipment to work right for some reason. I think that's why they ended up bringing George Martin in too. George saved the day because they had purchased EMI, and George had an actual 8-track recording system, and he brought that into the sessions when they moved it back to the studio. That was his equipment, and made it all work out possible with the album and the recording on the roof. But it was interesting to watch the process of the songwriting too. During the songwriting process, they would be banging something out, and some old pop tune or skiffle tune or something would come to their mind, and it would remind them of what they were trying to bang out, and they'd start playing it. And I couldn't believe how many songs they knew from way back in the day. But Paul and George would start playing it. They'd say, "Ha, that's funny because that's sounds like that song." It sounded like the song they were trying to write sometimes. Yeah, they heard other pop songs underneath their songs that they were writing, and they would sing them the instruments. So it was really interesting. They got the Fender equipment in, and they had Paul also had a Rickenbacker, and he had the Hoffman bass. Paul didn't, and they did get a 6-string Fender bass, and on one song John plays the Fender bass. I don't know if it was Long and Winding Road or which one, but John was playing the Fender bass, and Paul was playing the piano. Paul liked his Hoffman bass. He was always playing his Hoffman bass, and he took one of the Fender stickers off of the equipment that came in and stuck it on his bass at one point, on his Hoffman bass, because he thought it was cool, I guess. During the recording sessions, they wanted him to play the Rickenbacker. They said, try the Rickenbacker, and he had a hard time with it. It had too many buttons and controls on it, and he wasn't sure how to get the sound they were looking for in the booth off of the bass. And he kept messing around with that, and finally he was like, no, just give me my Hoffman bass back. They talked about remembering gigs in Germany and what happened, funny things. It was Glyn Johns, that's who I'm thinking of. Glyn Johns was pretty much the recording engineer on it. He had a really hard time. He had a hard time, set up everything and get all the sound right while they were, and they didn't pay much attention to it at all. They were just working on their songs. And the whole time the engineers were running around in the background trying to get all the sounding right. And they were recording their rehearsal sessions too, which was interesting, a lot of them. Yeah, George was very spiritual. They had all gone on this quest in India at one time, a year or two before this whole thing. John came out very skeptical about the experience and was kind of negative about it, had negative things to say, and talked to Paul about it. Paul was just kind of like, whatever, what it was. But George had taken the spiritual aspect of it very seriously. I think that was part of the reason George felt slighted a lot of times, because he took that more seriously than the others did. There was a little bit of a rub there, because I think John would make jokes about it sometimes, and I think George didn't appreciate that very much. They wasted an incredible amount of tape screwing around at one time. I don't know if it was Alan Parsons or Glyn Johns that was in the booth, and they said, you realize this tape costs, so I can't remember how many pounds a foot or how many pennies or cents or whatever it was. You realize this tape costs this much per foot. And they were really frustrated because they were just goofing off in there. But that was part of the process, they'd play something and then come up with an idea. Anyway, the point is, for me, is if you get a chance to see this documentary, do so, because on so many levels it gives me insight, affirmation into the whole process that I went through as a songwriter, musician, playing in bands. The same experience was done by the Beatles. They just happened to be at a time in the right places doing things at a time, and they were innovators, and they were open, and they learned a lot. What a life. What a life. They did this whole thing because they didn't want to tour anymore. Touring was unbearable for them. I mean, at the end. In the beginning it was a lot of fun, but it became unbearable because the crowds just screamed all the time. They couldn't hear what they were doing, so they needed to do venues where they could control the crowds a little bit. That's why they were trying to do this TV appearance, make it into a TV special. But that didn't work out. They ended up doing the concert on the roof. And even that became disruptive in the city of London, the cops had to come and shut them down. And they show the whole cops scenes in there. It's kind of funny because they keep coming into Apple Records going, what's going on? What are you doing up there on the roof? What are you guys doing? And they had a receptionist there who was trying to be very polite. And then I don't know who it was that came down. One of their managers came down and was talking to the police saying, yeah, they'll be done in a minute. And they ended up going up there and unplugging them. Actually, at one point, they unplugged George's amp. One of the road managers came up and said the police want to shut it down, and unplugged it. And George turned around, got really mad, went over and plugged it in back in himself, and finished playing. So it's quite fascinating. It's a very fascinating documentary. If you get a chance to see it, I really recommend watching the whole 6 hours. I mean, binge watch it, however you want to do it, but it's awesome. Well, that was really long, and this is going to be cut up, edited quite a bit, and I'm sure I'm going to think of things while I'm editing it that I wished I'd said instead of something else, whatever. But you guys have a great week. I am working on some things. I don't know if you can see here. I got my DAW up. I'm trying to record. I got my bass over here. I was laying down bass tracks earlier. Record some stuff. Trying to do like a recording of a cover tune, as well as thinking about some original material I want to record. Working on that kind of stuff, but I'm going to try. I keep having intention to try to get better at putting time aside and doing this. Maybe I won't watch so much documentaries on TV. Be a good start. Well, you folks have a good week. Thanks for tuning in. Jay out.